What does George Strait and Steve Perry have in common? We'll talk about that coming right
And now it's time for Steve Perry News with Gary Stuckey. All Steve Perry News.
Hello, everybody. It's Gary Stuckey, and this is Steve Perry News. And yesterday I was reading over on the Steve Perry group page, the new one over there, and somebody saw my profile pic from Facebook, and they said, you remind me of Kyle Chandler. And I said, yeah, people used to say that. And, he played Gary in Early Edition, the TV show, and I think he was in Friday Night Lights. And I got to thinking about that, and I got to thinking about the first time I saw Kyle Chandler was a movie called Pure Country with George Strait. So I got the movie out. It was just on my mind, and I started to play it uh, an hour or so ago, and I was watching it, and I got to thinking about the movie. I've seen the movie a ton of times, and I got to thinking about the movie. The movie sounds similar to Steve Perry. It's very similar. Uh, the guy, George Strait's playing a guy named Dusty who's on stage, singing night after night. The lights are bright and the smoke is out, is covering him, and he's getting tired of it. And he looks out at the fans, and it's all starting to, become a blur and overwhelming. And he can't, even think anymore. It's all getting to him. And some other issues there, internal issues, but it really makes him decide, right there in the middle of a tour. They're like right smack dab in the middle of a tour, and he just walks away. And everybody, the band is like, where did he go? He walked away. So, and it's similar to Steve Perry. So George in the movie, Dusty, he goes back home. I think he visits his grandma at his old house growing up. He visits some graveyards. So he's really thinking about the past and hurts. He misses his mom and dad who had passed away. And instead of getting on a Harley like Steve, riding around his hometown, he gets on a horse and he learns how to rope and ride and, things like that. So he tries to rediscover his life. And his grandma was telling in the movie, his Grandma Ivy, was telling the drummer in the band, now listen to this. I want you to think about this. She said, sometimes a tree grows too fast and the roots don't develop. And sometimes you have to chop off the top of the tree to let the roots catch up. And I thought, wow, that's pretty deep. Something to think about. Think about that. Rewind that and listen to that again. It's pretty interesting. So there George Strait was as Dusty, and he goes back to his roots and, riding the horses and getting back into farm life and the life he loved, the simple life. And he meets this lady. And when he sees her, his eyes, locks in on her, and he can't stop, staring at her. And things happen and ups and downs, but they end up together, just like Steve and Kelly. And unfortunately, Kelly passed away. So there's not a happy ending, but there was a love story that was great while it lasted, and it inspired Steve to come and do music again. It inspired him to start making music at the request, and Steve made a promise to Kelly that he would come back. So just like in the movie, George comes back because of this woman. He rediscovers himself. He gets back to those roots, and the woman helps him discover everything that he was missing. And just like Steve Perry does, I thought that was very interesting. And the guy that wrote the screenplay, Rex McGee, he was a writer in California who was from Texas. And he says uh, he was approached by a guy that's friends with Colonel Tom Parker. Elvis's manager. And Tom Parker comes up to this guy that Rex knows and says, "Hey, I want to do a movie about George Strait, you know, and let him act and do he needs to do movies like Elvis," is what Tom said. And so Tom Parker approaches George Strait on tour, and says, "Hey man, you need to start making movies." George is like, George is real shy and doesn't want to talk, about all that stuff. He's thinking about it. So Rex McGee, the writer, he goes, to try to make this movie and write this movie. So he stays around with George Strait, spends some time with him, and George is real laid back. But Rex was from Texas, moved to California, and he said he got burnt out of California, living in California now, coincidentally where Steve is from. But he got burnt out. He moved back to Texas, back to his roots, and rediscovered himself, and that's how the movie came about. So all this is very coincidental. And as I was sitting there tonight watching the movie, I got to thinking, wow, Steve Perry, this is very similar to Steve. So do yourself a favor, all you Steve Perry fans, go watch Pure Country starring George Strait and see how close it is to Steve Perry's life and understand where Steve was coming from when he got burnt out and see how he rediscovered himself and now he's back, just like George was in the movie. Just something to think about. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. God bless you, everybody. This is Gary Stuckey. Don't stop believing.